Today I want to talk about a subject where actually almost all of us are experts. That is COVID and what's going to happen. How do I now get on to the to present? Abu, will somebody sort of help me, because it looks as if Asghar Ali is presenting. All right, good. Now I can present, and I'll do that. One second, let me present. Okay, am I visible now? Hello?
No, your PPT is not visible.
The PPT is not visible. Right. We did have that earlier, didn't we?
Yes, sir. This is the little problem with Google Meet. Every time somebody shares a screen, you have to do it again.
I see. So, right. Now is this all right?
No. Yes, coming.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Yes, coming. Yeah,
Okay.
fine. Perfect.
All right. So, I want to talk about something which is dear to all of us. We are in the education field. And, as Abu was so generous in his introduction, the question of higher education in India is something that has concerned me quite deeply for a while. And ever since this pandemic started, I've been more than a little worried, like all of us, on what are things going to look like in the future. I believe that the pandemic has already changed the rules of the game, and it's going to be a challenge to us as to how we react to this particular crisis. So I'm not going to talk for very long, I hope. And what I'd briefly like to do is to discuss what this pandemic is about. When does post-COVID-19 start for all of us, and what are the implications for higher education? I'm particularly interested in colleges and universities. So what are the changes that we are going to see in our classrooms? What is going to happen to us, teachers, and what are the expectations of society? And then I'll conclude with some discussion of implications for research. And I'm particularly keen that I think there are huge opportunities for change, and I'd like to see us use them. Right? Okay, so very briefly about the pandemic, because all of us are sick and tired of getting news every day about it. But one thing that we do realize is that the disease is highly contagious. Uh, it was reported at the end of 2019. It was declared a pandemic on the 11th of March this year. In May, the total number of cases was something like 4 million. Today, it's already over 12 million, almost 13. And the number of deaths is more than 500,000. These numbers were not just put on to impress, but to show one important fact, and that is that in the past 2 months, the number of cases has gone from something like 4 million to something like 13 million, around a factor of 3. Whereas in India, the number of cases in May was 52 or 53,000. Today it is 8.5 lakhs. The rate of change in India, the rate of increase of cases in India is well above the global trends, both for the number of cases as well as for the number of deaths. And so
Hello. Sir, please unmute your audio. Sir, please unmute your audio.
All right.
Yes, fine.
Okay, so I start from the beginning again. Should I start from the beginning?
Yes, yes, please.
Okay, all right. Okay, am I both audible and visible?
Yes, sir. Perfect.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so since I've already started saying a lot of things, so let me repeat myself. Thank you, Abu. Thank you, Abdul. Thank you, all of you at base. And let you know, this is a topic that all of us know a fair amount about, and all of us are actually very concerned about, because the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, has already changed the rules of the game and is going to change more of them. All right. In this talk, what I will do is to briefly give you a background to the pandemic, just some important numbers and so on, and discuss what are the implications for higher education, college and university. I believe that a large part of this is going to be what happens to the classroom, and how we have to adapt to the whole education scenario. Right? Now, the reason why we have to really worry is that this is not a problem that's going to go away soon. This is a problem that's going to stay with us for at least, I believe, 3 years, maybe more. The disease is highly contagious, although it doesn't seem to be highly pernicious, as of now at least. In the few months that the disease has been declared a pandemic, between May and now, the number of cases has increased by a factor of something like 3. In the last 2 months, the number of deaths has increased also by a factor of something like 2 or 3. In India, the situation is a little worse. Because the rate of increase is well above global trends. We are very much in a phase where the disease is increasing, and every day we will see the numbers increasing for a while. As of now, there is no vaccine, and the only protection we have is hygiene, washing with soap, wearing face masks, and minimizing contact. As we all realize, since this is our only protection against this disease, the implications for higher education really come as a result of these of this protocol, right? In addition to wearing masks and minimizing contact, frequent testing, quarantine, contact tracing, all these are, many of these are things that we cannot afford very, very easily. Now, this is not the first pandemic that the world has seen. And then on this scale, 100 years ago, there was the Spanish flu. And at that time in India, 12 million people died. Now, we don't expect to see numbers on that scale at all these days, partly because the general health of population has increased significantly in the last 100 years. 100 years ago, the life expectancy in India was around 30 years. It's a little difficult to believe, but it was not much more than 30 years. whereas today we have now reached over 70. So we don't expect to see numbers like 12 million, but the numbers are going to be large in our country. And as I've already mentioned, it is going to last probably until 2024. So we need to prepare for a post-COVID-19 world. That is the worst part of it being right now. We need to prepare for it in a way. Okay. At present, there seems to be very few options. Given our relative ignorance of the disease, the inadequate public health measures, there was really no option here or anywhere else in the world for that matter, but to close colleges and universities, because this is a place where people are in very close contact. Right? And nobody is insulated from this virus by either wealth or by privilege. And over the last 3 days, we've seen that, this high-profile family in Bombay, the Bachchans, almost all of them have got cases, got the disease. May not be very severe cases, but in terms of wealth and privilege, it's difficult to imagine those would be very different from that. So getting the disease is very much a matter of chance. Who meets who contacts who, and so on. Treatment is difficult, and especially when the disease is severe, mortality can be quite high. And for now, therefore, the general methodology just seems to be try to avoid meeting anybody, wear masks, wash hands, keep distance, and repeat. All right. This is not really anything to do with. This is a management approach to this particular disease, right? Now, given the intense need and effort across the globe, there will be a vaccine sooner. I wrote this a couple of months ago, but I don't know. Maybe next year there will be a vaccine. Certainly not on the 15th of August, but there will be something that will come around. But chances are it won't be a very great vaccine, meaning it will not be something that will either be long-lasting or will cover everybody. It looks like there will be some drugs which were developed for other diseases which will probably have some effect on this. Already there are many candidates, not hydroxychloroquine, but dexamethasone, remdesivir. There are some other drugs closer to home that have been developed. That is something, right? Plasma therapy holds some promise, and people have started making plasma banks, but these are all for cases that are quite severe. Now, it's also true that we are a social animal, and the human spirit can only take so much of isolation and physical distancing, and we need to be up and about to get back to normal life. But what is normal, right?
Sir, sorry to interrupt. Sir, can you please share your screen again? PPT is not visible.
The screen is gone?
Yes, sir.
How does the screen go so often, man? Right, just a second. Oops.
Sir, I guess you just need to press the present now button. Yeah.
I'm now presenting?
Yes, sir. Now it is.
Thank you so
visible,
much,
sir.
sir.
Okay, sir.
Just please let me know when was this visible? Yeah. Did you all see this
Yes,
one?
sir. Yeah,
Yes,
the
sir.
previous slides were visible.
Yes, sir.
The
Yes, sir.
previous slides were visible.
Okay.
I mean, and your voice is perfectly audible as well.
All right. So this screen was visible?
Yeah, very much.
All right. And okay. Now, we are not designed to just be isolated most of our lives, right? We need to get back into doing what it is that makes us human. And interaction with others is what makes us human. The best that we can do right now is to come on Zoom or Meet or any one of these platforms. But chances are we are going to have to do something to get back to increased contact with each other. Like I said, this disease is going to be seasonal. It will recur every so often, at least till 2022 and probably up till 2024 and maybe even beyond. There may be a vaccine, but the chances of the so-called herd immunity and all that people are okay, so there is the political approach, there is a management approach, there is a scientific approach, and all these are wanting the same thing, namely that there should be a cure and that the bulk of the population should be safe, but our sort of the focus is very different in many cases, all right? So from a scientific point of view, we need to get a vaccine. It's not going to be developed in India, but it'll probably be produced in India. All right, so that's one positive. From a management point of view, people would like to just get the economy back and working, but how do you do that while ensuring safety for everybody? We don't know, all right? And I am not even sure what the political will is. But I'd like to just say one thing that we should all remember is that there are many, many other diseases that affect all of us. And there's a philosopher, the French philosopher, André Comte-Sponville, he says, I have good news and bad news. Bad news is that we are all going to die. And the good news is that the vast majority of us will die from something other than COVID-19. So we should keep a little perspective on this disease and how we are going to deal with it. Now, for the last 3 months, all of us have been seeing, all these pictures of clean blue skies, birds and, animals walking around cities and all that. But this cannot last if our economy is already damaged, and we cannot afford this. However much we might like blue skies, it's good for Instagram, but it's not good for the economy, right? And our concern, what will higher education look like when we come back to work, right? Now, one thing that we do realize is that we are all in it together, and no finer exposition of this fact than was said that by John Donne, some 400 years ago. No man is an island. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. If a clod be washed away, he was English, so he said, if a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less. Any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. At the risk of just explaining the obvious, this piece by John Donne just points out that, look, we are all in this thing together, and we cannot afford to just treat anybody's death as unimportant. Nobody is more important than us, but also nobody is less important. And whatever the solutions are going to be held by all of us. And this is most relevant for us because I truly believe that education is a community activity. It is not something that you do in isolation. Modern education tries to reach as many people as possible. And it is one of the very few ways we know of reducing social inequalities. Education thrives on discussion, on debate, on interaction, and all other means of social contact. And the two great universities that I've been associated with, that is JNU and the University of Hyderabad, discussion and debate have always been an extremely important part of the way in which education occurred. Now, each subject has its own pedagogic dynamics, as all of us know, because we are all involved in one or the other subject. There are different ways of teaching different subjects. Mathematics, physics, chemistry have a certain style. Economics has a certain style. Sociology, English, all these have different styles, but all of them rely on one thing, that is the interaction between teacher and student. This is fundamental to the process of teaching. At the same time, how I teach a subject will affect how the student will learn another subject from another teacher. So different subjects are also linked, and teachers depend on other teachers. I'm saying something which all of us instinctively realize, but it's important to emphasize this because the whole process of teaching is such a communal activity. It is something that the entire community is engaged in. Now, online education is something that the government of India has just jumped into from the month of March onwards, as if teachers could stop teaching in the classrooms and just move online. And this is not something particularly new. Online education has existed for a long time, but across the world and places where there has been much more research on it, educationists and policymakers have advised caution. It has not lived up to its potential, and according to reports which in this magazine Inside Higher Education, fully online coursework actually increases socio-economic and racial achievement gaps. And in the West, it is more important that its affordability, but we should really worry about this move to higher education online, because it will increase the gap, both socio-economic as well as racial. You can change that to either community or social groups in our country. Now, we've got only these kinds of protocols that are issued, by everybody. And here at IIT Delhi, for example, mask wearing, social distancing, sanitizing, etc., all the time. This is the only thing that we have with us. How do you bring this to a classroom? Now, the caution that we all have learned over the last few months is going to have to come into our regular life. And if online education is not going to be the answer, the physical classroom is a necessity. How can we have classrooms change to incorporate both distancing measures as well as keeping the health protocols? You can take everybody's temperature with some handheld device if you like. You can have sanitizers, but sanitizers are expensive. Water is not available all the time everywhere. And again, going back to JNU or to Hyderabad, water was a commodity which was in sort of low supply. Within existing classroom sizes and class sizes, we cannot accommodate all the students with the required physical separation. How do we do this? Do we have more sections with smaller class sizes? If there are going to be more sections, it may then require that every teacher has to teach, each of these sections, and many teachers are not going to double or triple the kind of work they do. So we're going to have to use technology, and we're going to have to do it in a humane way if we want to ensure that equitable access is maintained. Now, what else do we prepare for? If, to try to optimize all these things, I believe that it may be necessary to teach less. Namely, we may have fewer contact hours per course, and ask our students to rely a little more on self-learning, right? And instead of asking students to spend 3, 4, or 5 years physically in colleges, we may have to come up with more practical requirements. In particular, the assessment that we will be asking ourselves to do will have to make the education process more flexible. What I'm trying to say is that you can't have it in this, given our classroom sizes, we cannot have physical distancing. If we can't have physical distancing, then maybe we can't, we just have to teach fewer hours and go to some kind of a blended mode where the outcome is got to be the main thing that we are worried about. Not that a person has taken some 65 credits or so many hours of lectures and so on and so forth. We just have to worry about whether the person has got the education that is required. Now, this is also going to require that self-learning will have to increase. Today's student has access to a wide range of learning material on the web. Already, in our classrooms, many students have learned that teachers don't know everything, and therefore you have to go to either share, Khan Academy or MOOCs or Coursera or what have you. People have already been using this. This might now have to become a primary source of learning. NPTEL is there for some technical subjects, and we may all have to help in increasing the range and scope of these courses. And I think one of the things that so far, the responsibility for, of the teacher has been somewhat more in making them responsible for, seeing that the student learned and so on. I think much more will have to be demanded of students as preparation for the course and preparation for each class. In some universities, particularly abroad, there's the so-called flipped classroom where the entire lecture material is given to the student beforehand, and all that is done is a discussion in the classroom. I've attended some flipped classrooms and found it very useful. Maybe we're going to have to experiment with these kinds of models because the number of contact hours will go down. I'm sure many of you know about these massive open online courses. We may have to experiment more with them. Already in India, we do them for some technical courses. Maybe for non-technical courses also, there may be no option but to allow such courses for credit. The worst thing that happened in the month of March was that all teachers were just told to go online. And whether you liked it or not, all you did was to just go there and then pretend that we were giving our classes to a video camera instead of to the students. I think there's a little more to online teaching. There are new techniques that we have to learn. All over the world, actually, people have to relearn how to teach. And there was an article in Nature recently showing what the classroom is going to be like, and what do you have to do in order to teach online. There are some rules, but these are probably good for Western universities, but for Indian universities, given our connectivity, and already Abu is sitting on the roof somewhere, because the internet connectivity is better outside. I think our classrooms are going to have to change, and we have to come up with the solutions, right? But most importantly, not everybody in our classrooms is going to have smartphones or laptops. And this is going to be one of the main reasons why we have to come up with some ideas of some more imaginative and more humane ways of doing online engagement. Anyway, we'll come to that later on. The Ministry of Human Resource Development and many other higher education regulatory bodies have endorsed the move to online education. But I believe that, pressure that is put on us at this time needs to be resisted, at least until our institutions and students are ready for it. This is important because I come from the public university system where all social sections of students are coming for higher education. Those particularly who are from rural backgrounds and from economically lower, less endowed groups, they will have to be funded adequately to change the way in which these kinds of organizations impart education. And cooperation is going to be essential. Teachers should cooperate a little more with colleagues. Prerequisites need to be taken seriously, etc. One second. Right. Now, beyond classrooms and teaching, one of the things that actually is worrying a lot is that research has really stopped since the month of March. Because one of the things that we do is to mentor students, research supervision, and we attend conferences and seminars. And this is what gives people, an impetus to be a university professor. And this is going to change very drastically post-COVID. It's not just going to be because of the socially distant mentoring, but PhD supervision is something where the interaction between teacher and student is so important. It can be done one-on-one with two people in one room, I suppose, but this is going to suffer a lot because of the because of the demands of social distancing. Conferences are going to be a casualty. Right, we are not going to be able to travel very much, and of course, the economic situation all over the world will make the expenses prohibitive. And so, like we are doing today, we will have to learn to communicate via Zoom or Skype or Meet or whatever it is that we use. So, this is going to change the way in which we interact with one another. All right. But the thing that bothers me, and particularly for young researchers who are starting out their careers, the biggest negative is going to be a consequence of the economic downturn. Now, we spend less than 1% of our GDP, but when the GDP itself is going down by 20%, what is going to happen is a reduction in research spending in India. This is just the opposite of what we need, because unless we boost basic research in our country, our preparedness for how to cope with this particular pandemic and for the next coming pandemics is going to be a huge problem. And I really believe that it is important that we should increase the amount of research, both pure and applied sciences and social sciences, actually all areas of human inquiry, because if one thing that the pandemic has taught us is that all areas of science, humanities, social sciences, they are the only guarantee that we have that we can prepare ourselves for the future. We can be pretty sure that there are going to be more crises that we will face. And this is not going to be just a global crisis where we can hope that the vaccine will come from the US or from France or UK or wherever, right? Now, at the same time, cynicism is not an option. We've seen these kinds of heartbreaking pictures. India needs to change. And after the pandemic passes, we cannot afford to go back to the way that things were, right? even the government of India realizes that only science can help India against the coronavirus, but this can only happen when all sections of society have access to education. And there is an opportunity, I think, that we all have to reform our education systems to bring the country into a modern age by making all sections of our society have access to education. I think we should use technology to reach all sections of society to be more inclusive. If many of us are moving online onto Zoom and such like, in order to teach, maybe all our lectures can become available to everybody. We don't have too many options, and we have to see what is the best way we can do to make education available actually to a much, much wider section of our society. And I think that these are the kinds of reforms that we could use. We certainly need them, right? There's a very steep learning curve that this pandemic has imposed upon us. It has made us learn very, very quickly that social inequalities are huge in our society. We've also seen that access to education, to have the digital divide, is very strong. And we've had to learn that all subjects are important in modern India. And we need to somehow use all this information to cope with this particular kind of crisis. A little over a month ago, one of my other students from the University of Hyderabad and we set up a discussion where we asked teachers, students from all over the country to write about how the pandemic has affected their learning or their teaching, and what the move to online, etc., has meant for their institution as well as for their subject. You'll find this in the second link over here. Now, we wrote an article in the Hindu based on what we had learned, and that's also the third link over here. And I've written about some of this on my blog, and I'd pass on all these links to you momentarily once I stop sharing on this particular screen. This is about what I have to say on this particular topic. So let me thank you for your attention, and I'd welcome some discussion on this particular topic right now. Okay. So let me stop sharing my screen and get back to the... okay, am I sharing the screen anymore? No.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
And now,
so I'm just sending a message with all these links on this, to the chat.
okay. Now the session is open to all. If anybody has question, please ask your question directly to Professor Ram Ramaswamy. If anybody has any questions, please ask directly to Ram Ramaswamy.
Hi.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Musar.
Thank you, Professor Ramaswamy, for such an interesting talk. My question is, if we move gradually to online teaching, the way we are all experiencing, those of us who are teaching in different places, the danger or the kind of anxiety many of us have is, what will be the role of the teacher gradually? Are we going to become redundant? Because if universities can make do with online teaching, hiring part-time teachers, are they really going to hire in future full-time professors for the universities? So what is it exactly going to be like?
Right. This is Musharraf, is it?
Yes, I'm Musharraf. Yeah.
Hi, Musharraf. You see, the point is that the role of the teacher can never be denied anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's going to be a blended mode where
Okay.
we have limited interactions with the students because everybody realizes the importance of this personal contact. Even now, it's, putting my screen off instead of at least having my face visible. Even that is an important step. And what I think we are going to experiment with is having people come in for limited periods of time, not rely so much on the physical classroom, but to have some kind of blended mode,
Right, right.
right?
Yeah,
So
and that.
I think
Sorry.
it's very stupid for an institution to believe that they can really teach people without the intermediaries. Our role will always be there.
No, I'm asking this question because, I'm looking at the Indian higher education ecosystem and I can see many universities around. I'm not talking about the public ones, of course. Like there are many private universities in India who have already laid off a large number of teachers, faculties, especially senior faculties whom they have to pay a lot more money. So right now they're making do with assistant professors or early career associate professors. So that's why I'm asking this question, because we are seeing how the whole landscape is changing gradually. But thank you so much for your response.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I mean, you see, this is a topic on which, we can discuss endlessly, especially because
Yeah,
it's an evolving scenario.
right.
What I've noticed is that in the private universities, all the students have got laptops and smartphones.
Mm, mm,
In IIT, 20% of any class in the IITs, which are elite institutions, more than 20% in any class just cannot access the lectures online,
mm,
right? My own students, I've got one of them in Rajasthan and one of them in Orissa. I haven't been able to contact the latter for almost a month now.
That's surprising.
Yeah, so this is going to be a problem, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. We will take another question. MD Ataul Islam, please go with your question.
Thank you, Prof, for your
Yeah.
excellent presentation. Actually, I'm from Manchester University, working here in the molecular modeling field. So, what I feel that is this post-COVID situation. Do you think that is the more computer application-oriented subject like pharmacoinformatics, cheminformatics, bioinformatics? These will be more demanded nowadays because these.
I don't think so, Islam. You see, the thing is that it may seem very attractive that you can get education, in technical subjects like computer modeling and all, without, too much difficulty. But I think the demand for the humanities and social sciences will be as large as ever.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've tried to point out over there is that it is going to be up to us as to how do we teach effectively using technology, but teaching our own subjects. At the end of the day, students will want to learn literature, they will want to learn, mathematics. Pure mathematics is going to be as difficult as history or English or any of those
That's true.
subjects, right? So I don't think that increased interest in computer programming is going to start because of this.
Okay. Thank you, Prof.
We will take another question. M. Hayat, please unmute yourself and go with your question. M. Hayat.
Hi, Suresh. Right, Hayat is not asking, Abu.
Okay, may I come in with my question, please? I'm Nasima Islam from Kolkata.
Yeah.
Hello, sir. So sorry I missed out on on the first part of your lecture. That's very unfortunate. So I'm not sure if you did shed light on this concept. So my question has to do with the idea of a surveillance nation state and the idea of censorship. I mean, because we cannot remain at this standstill that this COVID pandemic has put us into. So eventually we have to go with this, as you said, like blended mode, online and offline. Yeah, so conveniently. But the thing is, if everything is online, there's a risk that everything is being recorded, and surely it is being recorded. There would be
Yeah.
some virtual archive.
Hmm.
So in this scenario, sir, as you know, like our nation state is actually, taking a very, I don't know, like anti-dissent kind of a stand, fascistic stand.
Yes, I'm
So,
deeply
so,
aware of that.
so in this scenario, sir, some of us who do not always, comply with the establishment, or love to, talk about or mobilize our students to, exercise their rational thinking. So it is this entire idea that we are being recorded, whatever we're saying. Like when it was, a physical
No, I
classroom.
understand, Nasima. No, I
Ji,
do
ji.
understand.
So my, it's the last line. So my worry, like I'm very worried because I think it is imposing a kind of a self censorship or auto censorship as well, where we are censoring ourselves even before the establishment is going to censor us. So your thoughts on this? Thank you.
Yeah. See, Nasima, this is, this is a trade-off. If you don't go online and if you don't go to a blended mode, all right, how the precise details of the blended mode is a different thing. Your access is very, very limited. If you, you can go ahead and be completely, you can have all the dissent you want, but if it's only two of you in one room, it's not very effective. So I think we are going to have to give up a little of the privacy issue in order to reach out to larger numbers. And, some of it is we're going to have to figure it out, all right, in the sense that it is not possible for us, to limit ourselves to very small numbers if you want to be effective in what you do. So, okay, so I mean, that's really what I feel, that the trade-off between access and privacy, by access I mean a wider access, a larger net of people that you can reach, and this privacy is going to be, something that it's going to be a nuanced approach that we're going to have to figure out, because ultimately the airwaves, the power, all this comes from the state. So, finally, we expect the state to be responsible for giving us, uninterrupted power and Wi-Fi. And then, of course, we will have a certain amount of surveillance from them, but we're going to have to figure out how to deal with it. I know it's not a very satisfactory, but it's just pragmatic.
Yeah, I get it, sir. But don't you think, if I may add, sorry, to Virgin again, don't you think, sir, it will put us under huge risk? I mean, we will be rendered more vulnerable. And
we already are vulnerable, Nasima. I mean,
yeah,
see, even in over the phone, when we know that your phone is going to be tapped, we control ourselves, right?
Ji.
And many of us in today's India do not speak completely openly.
So basically, we have to play hide and seek with the state, if I may put it like that, on a comical tone.
But the way I am seeing it is that I am really interested in increasing the delivery of, of just education, whatever it is, to as many people as we possibly can, and therefore we have to make some kind of a compromise.
Yeah, if I could just interject briefly here.
Yeah.
In my university, we have been teaching online, and we have been actually asked to record our lectures
Yeah.
when we deliver the lecture. We teach through MS Teams actually,
Uh-huh.
and more than the state, the first level of if there is any sort of an optical, it's the institute more than the state actually.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
the university. But so far, I also must say that many universities are very progressive. They do not want to intervene in what the teacher is saying in the class. It is not always that they are simply sitting there to pounce on us. I mean, that's what my experience is. But I have seen also a lot of anxiety from a lot of faculty members about recording their lectures and making it available in the archive. Yeah, it's never easy. Yeah.
Yeah, see, but the other thing is also that, we also need to improve our online delivery.
Yes, yes,
To be actually more effective as teachers.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Abu?
Yes, sir.
All right. No. Who is moderating?
Many people. There are several people who have logged in from best lecture account.
Okay. All right.
Sir, can you comment on this UGC's recent this guidelines on exam? First they say something else and then something else.
See, I personally think this kind of micro level management is just the wrong way to go. And somewhere I think our vice chancellors are going to have to request the government of India that if you want us to be Atmanirbhar, then you should leave the management of the university to the university instead of controlling it all from Delhi. It is really impossible for officials sitting in the UGC office to determine when it is an appropriate time or the model that is appropriate for a university in deep South India. So I think that they should rely on universities to do their job and allow them to do their job instead of dictating that the exams have to be in online mode or this mode or that mode. Let the universities manage their own, the stuff that they do.
True, sir. Not even UGC. It came from MH.
Yeah. I mean, MHRD, UGC, PMO, I don't know where all these things come from. But really, the responsibility should go, if not to the level of the teacher, at least let it go to the vice chancellor of the university. He or she is eminently responsible and they can look after things.
Yes, Vice Chancellor from West Bengal are writing to UGC separately.
I think it's very important.
Sir, that's where I have another question. I mean, just part of this question. In the new education policy, we see that, all these universities and colleges are going to be given autonomy, as we understand. That's a proposal. Now, like the university I teach in, we didn't have to really comply with the UGC guidelines of this kind because we already conducted and finished our semester, with our online assessment and all that. Now, suddenly we see these public universities are kind of embroiled in this new policy of having to conduct exams and all that. Now, what do you think in the new education policy that it has been proposed? Is that a viable way to go, that every college and university should have autonomy of their own? Is that viable in a country like India with such differential quality in educational institutes?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of criticism of this new education policy because it's a policy that has been, laid down. This top-down approach is not good for India. It doesn't respect the diversity of our country. It doesn't respect the very differential resources that are available to different institutions. And most importantly, it is a policy that has been laid down by people who are actually not involved in teaching in our country. The number of educationists who are involved in this sort of very idealized proposal is minimal. I feel that the this desire to control is it's not wise in a country like ours.
Mhm.
And it doesn't improve standards of teaching at all.
Yeah, but the new education policy says that we should, give autonomy to every college and university in this country.
Musharraf,
And
the actual autonomy they are giving is very little. See, if they would really give autonomy, then it is worth discussing. The only autonomy that you're not actually having a lot of autonomy. Autonomy is only to hire and some sort of funny things. You cannot really design the courses that you're teaching. You cannot decide on the number of hours. You cannot decide on, the important parts of education.
right. Thank you.
Sir, Hayat sir is saying that when a student spends long hours on digital screen, implication on health, etc., how that can be managed? Cope up.
This is, I believe that it's not, I don't know. From a health perspective, it is not a great idea to have to be on the screen so much. These days we all have to give so many lectures on Zoom. I have actually started disliking sitting and giving lectures. I need to stand and talk. Even today I tried to do that, except that the lighting wasn't very good. My mouth doesn't work as well when I'm sitting. So, there are going to be issues like this. These are less than ideal. So again, like I said, blended modes are going to have to emerge. We're going to have to figure out some ways of doing these things. And they've got to be very particular to our own country. You can't just take what they do in US or other nations and just follow them. We have to figure out what is best for us over here.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello, Professor Ramasan.
Yes, hi.
Thank you for this, thank you for this lecture. I unfortunately couldn't be there for the first 20 minutes. My question to you is kind of contradictory, because now we are going to see a lot of blended material on the internet, and education might appear as democratized to a large number of students. But then in a country like ours, there is so much income inequality, so much of material, even if it's available online, is not going to really create any revolution of sorts. So how are you going to see this?
See, Sheikh, I can't be too explicit about this, but, I did mention that we need a more humane approach and a more nuanced approach to this. What I mean explicitly is that if a student has got to have access to online, the education online, we must also ensure that he or she has got the device. And I think it's going to, we're going to have to come to an understanding that if there is a student admitted to higher education, then these kind of devices and things have got to be given. At the very simple level, you can say admission to a course means that you also get your iPad along with the admission. And you get also, your connections, connectivity, all that kind of stuff. We're going to have to figure out some way of doing that. In particular, you see what has been done for in the IITs. One of the things they are contemplating is that if students are in rural areas and they don't have access to the internet or what have you, those students will be encouraged to come to the IITs and stay in the hostels, even if others are not. So we're going to have to come up with some humane ways of dealing with these problems.
Thank you for this answer.
No, see, there is no magic solution. What I'm saying is that, when you raise problems which are real, I think we will be able to also find solutions which are practical for our country.
Sir, somebody named Sadaf Noor is asking the transition from traditional learning to self-learning from a student's perspective.
Yeah.
They are traditionally taught.
Yeah. See, the thing, Sadat, is that I feel is that many students just wander into higher education because that's the next degree to do or something like that. I think we will see a decrease in that number because there's going to be so much more self-reliance. You're going to have to rely on the student learning a lot, doing a lot of preparation. That I think we're going to see that students will have to take a lot more responsibility. And this is not just going to be at the bachelor's level. This will also now start happening at the high school level, at the 10+2 level. So, and one of the other things that we are going to do is also many institutions, once you admit the students, you're going to have to train them as you're going to train the teachers. If teachers have to be taught how to teach online, students are also going to have to be taught how to learn online. So I think we're going to see some of that also happening.
Dr. Somrat, would you like to ask?
Good evening, sir.
Good evening. Yes,
whether we have taken the call that, sir, whether we have decided to go ahead with this online education or it is a temporary solution?
Okay, one of the things I was trying to point out is that, see, until there is a vaccine which is guaranteed, I don't believe that we are going to be very secure about going in classrooms where the space between people is not very high. All right. So when are you planning to see your next movie? When are you going to go to a movie house? That's going to take some time, right? So, oh, Sabat. Right, hi. No, I think that this is not a temporary phase. I think it's going to be at least 3 to 4 years. So it is worthwhile for us to invest in, it's going to be really worthwhile for us to invest in thinking about this problem. It's not going to go away next year.
Thank you.
Yeah?
Thank you, sir.
I don't think so. The estimates that many people have given is 2024. All right, so we're going to have to come up with solutions that will last for at least 3 to 4 years. And like I tried to say, I think that there's an opportunity over here. If we are going to go to blended modes, why should University of Hyderabad have only 8,000 students?
Sir,
maybe we can have 10.
Continuation to this. It is not related to higher education, but nowadays, even in the grade 1, the schools have started online teaching.
Just 1 second.
And these kids.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
And it is not related to higher education, but in the grade 1 also, class 1 students are attending online classes.
See, that I think is bad. Okay, honestly, I'm not in favor of that. And, class 1 is one thing. Handicapped students are being, persons with disabilities who are in maximum need of person-to-person contact. They are being asked to attend online classes. This is stupid. We've got to have a little more humane approach to online teaching. Yeah, but that's one of the reasons why, at least today I was trying to only address higher education, and that too in universities and colleges. But I agree with you, class 1, class 2 and all this is temporary. For the younger classes, it has to go back to person teaching, because that is what teaching and learning is all about.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, someone is asking about practicals like chemistry, life sciences.
I've given a link in this. I'll give the link again. In this lecture, in this series of articles, the second one in particular, there are there's some discussion of how you might be able to do experiments, at least either demonstration experiments or some experiments online, right? This is not ideal, and we are going to have to come back to some form of lab practicals. The one thing that may happen is that instead of doing 20 practicals, you may just have to learn to do fewer. So this is going to be I think that this is one thing that we're going to have to see. All right, Farhan, would you please go to this particular series, this Confluence series, and there are some. There is one article in particular which talks about how to do practicals online. Again,
Okay, Sabina, if you like to ask directly. Firoj is speaking basically of digital divide, especially villages, that thing. That you have addressed, but you somehow.
No, but let me again emphasize, if the state is going to push us to online education, it is also the responsibility of the state to see that Wi-Fi connectivity is there all over the country, and that every student is not hampered by lack of device. Okay, I think that the responsibility is very straightforward. If MHRD is going to push us online, then they've got to also enable us online.
Sir, does it not mean that the education, post-COVID education will be backed by the richest only?
By the?
It does not mean that the post-COVID education will be backed by the richest only?
No, I mean, that's what I said. It is the responsibility of the state. Okay, the government has to step in and make access available to everybody.
And that's exactly, I'm sorry to interject, that's exactly the MHRD minister said a few days back, that now laptops will be made available to even college students, which was previously given to school students under some scheme. I forgot the name of the scheme. So I think we are moving gradually to that.
See, education is a state responsibility, all right? So, they cannot run away from this. If you're going to insist that I am teaching online, then I'm going to insist that you must have Wi-Fi everywhere in all remote parts. This digital divide cannot continue. It has to be bridged.
That's right, yeah.
All right, and I mean, this is again, what are we campaigning for? We would like to see everybody educated. It's actually appalling that in our country in the year 2020, such large numbers of people have no access to education. Forget about just higher education, people have no access to education.
Yep.
No, we have to start calling out the state on this issue.
Yeah, only if we are ready to spend more money on education, that is.
Well, and my worry is that, the education budget is linked to the GDP. The GDP has gone down.
Yes.
So, I mean, these are issues for us to be concerned about. And Nasima, if you're still around, I think it's important for us to speak. These are not against any particular government. Is this just as citizens, we have a right to say that this is what we expect our state to do?
Exactly. Yeah. But we have to like unifiedly, create pressure. We have to come up as pressure groups to, talk about these demands
Yeah.
ambiguously.
No, these are real problems. You see, the digital divide is present even in this presentation of 1 hour. The digital divide is huge. There are some people who can afford to switch on the videos, and there are some who simply cannot. All right, so this is, this is an important demonstration, and we have to ensure that our voices get heard.
Yes, sir. Exactly.
Resma, please.
Yeah, thank you. Sir, myself Reshma Parthi, a first-time student from Kolkata. I have a question.
Yeah.
What is the difference between self-quarantine and self-isolation when it comes to COVID-19? And one also, what to do if we are from rural background?
Can you just repeat it, Reshma?
Yes, sure, sir. Sir, what is the difference between self-quarantine and self-isolation when it comes to COVID-19? And what to do if we are from rural background?
Well, self-isolation is just a decision that you take because you want to be secure that you are not catching COVID-19 from anybody. And self-quarantine, again, is very similar to self-isolation, except that the possibility that you might have come in touch either by travel or by other contacts, a known contact actually having COVID-19, that would require you to be aware that you might have been exposed and then take particular care and monitor your temperature and so on and so forth. Now, whether you're in the rural or in the urban area, I think that in both those situations, one is going to have to do the same, essentially the same, and be aware and talk to your doctor.
So Sabina's question was regarding quality.
Yeah.
Can we maintain quality in this area?
Quality of teaching.
Overall quality of education. You are saying about that.
Okay, so see, let's face it. Right now, it's not clear that the quality of our education is that great, right? I don't think that there's going to be that much of a change in the overall quality unless we really try. I think it is possible for us to actually improve the quality of education because there is so much more material that is available on the web all around the world. So I think that opening up our students' eyes to the whole world around us, I think that will actually have a significant increase in the quality of the kind of education. Having said that, one of the things we worry about is how to evaluate, right? Online evaluation is not easy, and I think that this is something where we are going to have to do a lot of research. How do we evaluate what it is that we have taught the students, and how are we sure that the student has actually learned what we have tried to communicate? There is no one answer to this. There are many ways in which people are trying to do this, but I think that this is a challenge for us, is in evaluation of the effectiveness of what we have taught. But as far as giving quality material, I think that actually online opens up a lot more possibilities because we can just make so much more available to our students. I'm basically what I'm saying is that I'm positive about this aspect of online. Shall we think in terms of winding down, Abu?
Yes, sir. We'll finish it soon.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we should end up with like, because otherwise we'll go on and on. I'm privileged to propose like formal vote of thanks, which I'm very happy that my own professor, both at Hyderabad and JNU, we could interact virtually. Sir, you have certainly touched upon all the major issues of higher education, especially I would like to use the word, what P. Sainath calls it, fake optimism and cynical pessimism. We have to come out from this binary. So in the territory called hope, and which we have given sort of a positive light on the idea of online educations, with what you have correctly said, that the idea of humane approach towards educations. And what I would like to point out of a famous professor of justice, Professor Michael Sandel, how educations and health cannot be bought and sold in the market. No, the idea of the market society, we should delink the idea of market society with educations and health. So with this, encouraging sort of an enlightening views of higher educations, especially in post-COVID-19. And we are very much thankful to you, sir. And maybe in future, on behalf of BASE, would like to invite you for more further consultations, maybe with focused idea of how we should go about on the college educations and university educations. What you have said correctly, just in a nutshell, the managerial perspective and the political perspective, and which I would like to point to the philosophical perspectives as well. Going back to our constitutional values and promises, what constitutions promised long time back, promoting of scientific temper and sense of inquiry and reform. And I think it is a challenge before us, how higher educations in particular, how we should tackle the issues of digital divide and inequality in access, and also maintaining the quality of higher educations. With these words, on behalf of BASE and I would like to thank Professor Ramaswamy, and hopefully once things get normal, we would like to invite you in Calcutta and we'll have further consultations on this. And also I would like to thank Dr. Abu Saleh, the Secretary of BASE, and other members of BASE for organizing this important event, and also our learned and esteemed audience all across the world. People from US, people from Germany, I know they're all attending and listening to this lecture. On behalf of BASE, I would like to thank each and everyone, and hopefully we'll meet soon. And with the one request again, on 15th of this month, we're having a very good talk on Indian judiciary in the system by Dr. Umar. He was from JNU, but right now he's at Bennett University in Noida. So we are running a lecture series where Professor Jaffillo, Professor Gajendra, and all people all across the world and academics, they'll be joining us in a few months. So we would like to stay in touch with us and have a safe time and good night. Hope to see you soon again, sir.
Okay, thank you all. Bye-bye.